किसी व्यक्ति के निर्माण का स्वर्णिम समय यौवन काल होता है।
वर्ष 2011 की जनगणना के अनुसार हमारे देश में 35 वर्ष तक की उम्र की 65% आबादी है। यह युवा शक्ति जिधर चल पड़ेगी, देश में उधर ही चल पड़ेगा। अतः देश का भविष्य अब युवाओं के हाथ में है। ये युवा शक्ति ही राष्ट्र शक्ति बनकर राष्ट्र को समृद्धि, उन्नति एवं प्रगति के मार्ग पर ले जाएगी। यूपीएससी पंडित श्री राम शर्मा आचार्य जी युवा की अद्भुत परिभाषा दी। युवा वो है असंभव जिसकी शब्दकोश जो बाधाओं को ठीक कर अपना मार्ग बनाता है, जो परिस्थितियों का दास नहीं, उनका निर्माता, नियंत्रणकर्ता एवं स्वामी है, जो भाग्य नहीं।
किसी व्यक्ति के निर्माण का स्वर्णिम समय यौवन काल होता है, जिसमें वह आने वाले लंबे जीवन के लिए शरीर, मन और आत्मा का निर्माण और विकास करता है। इसी नींव पर अपने जीवन का मजबूत भवन खड़ा करता है और उसका भोग करता है। किसी भी राष्ट्र के विकास की आधारशिला और ऊर्जा उसकी युवा शक्ति ही होती है। यही उसका आत्मबल और इच्छा शक्ति भी होती है। इसीलिए कहा गया है, वीर भोग्य वसुंधरा। राष्ट्र निर्माण के ताने बाने में यौवन के ही धागे होते हैं। अतः जो राष्ट्र अपनी इस ऊर्जा का संरक्षण और संवर्धन करता है, वह विकास के उच्च शिखर पर पहुंचता है। राष्ट्र के कृषि, उद्योग, शिक्षा, चिकित्सा, तकनीक, राजनीति रूपी चक्के को यही युवा शक्ति व गति प्रदान करती है। यह राष्ट्र की रगों में बहने वाला गर्म खून है, जो उसे चैतन्य और प्रगतिशील बनाता है। भौतिक व आध्यात्मिक दोनों के विकास में इसी ऊष्मा का तप सक्रिय रहता है। इतिहास साक्षी रहा है कि जब किसी राष्ट्र की धुरी लड़खड़ाई है, युवा शक्ति ने आगे आकर अपने पुरुषार्थ से उसे सुदृढ़ बनाया है। आज अनेक प्रकार की समस्याएं जैसे नशा, फैशन परस्ती, पाश्चात्य जीवन शैली, आस्था संकट, भ्रष्टाचार, बेरोजगारी देश की युवा शक्ति पर आरूढ़ हैं। आज युवा शक्ति को आत्मबोध एवं अपने सांस्कृतिक गौरव से परिचित कराना समय की मांग है। वर्ष 2011 की जनगणना के अनुसार हमारे देश में 35 वर्ष तक की उम्र की 65% आबादी है। यह युवा शक्ति जिधर चल पड़ेगी, देश भी उधर ही चल पड़ेगा। अतः देश का भविष्य अब युवाओं के हाथ में है। यह युवा शक्ति ही राष्ट्र शक्ति बनकर राष्ट्र को समृद्धि, उन्नति एवं प्रगति के मार्ग पर ले जाएगी। युगऋषि पंडित श्री राम शर्मा आचार्य जी ने युवा की अद्भुत परिभाषा दी है। युवा वो है असंभव जिसके शब्दकोश में नहीं, जो बाधाओं को चीर कर अपना मार्ग बनाता है, जो परिस्थितियों का दास नहीं, उनका निर्माता, नियंत्रणकर्ता एवं स्वामी है, जो भाग्य नहीं, अपने कर्म पर विश्वास रखता है, जो उमंग, उत्साह, जोश से जीता व सुनहरे भविष्य के सपने देखता है, जो स्वयं सब कुछ करके गौरव अनुभव करता है और विश्व में कुछ अनूठा करना चाहता है।
असमंजस व अवसाद की स्थिति से गुजर रही युवा पीढ़ी को दिशा देने का काम एक चिंतक ही कर सकता है।
नमस्कार।
वर्ष 2006 में देव संस्कृति विश्वविद्यालय के दीक्षांत समारोह में पूर्व राष्ट्रपति डॉक्टर APJ अब्दुल कलाम व श्रद्धेय डॉक्टर प्रणव पंड्या जी, जो विश्वविद्यालय के कुलपति भी हैं, मिले और इन दोनों चिंतकों ने मंथन किया कि युवा पीढ़ी को एक सृजनात्मक मंच देने की आवश्यकता है जो राष्ट्र निर्माण में सहायक हो। यहीं से दिया की नींव रखी गई।
I am indeed delighted to participate in the second convocation of Dev Sanskriti Vishwavidyalaya. I am very happy that this institution has been created with a motto of developing the divine culture, which is of utmost importance to us while we are on the path of transforming India into a prosperous, happy and peaceful society. We have the responsibility of transforming India into a developed nation before the year 2020. It is an endless journey through knowledge and enlightenment. Such a journey opens up new vistas of development or humanism, where there is no scope nor room for pettiness, disharmony, jealousy and hatred or enmity. It transforms a human being into a wholesome whole, a noble soul and an asset to the universe. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, namaste, and welcome to this very special edition of Diya Mumbai's Gyan Sabha. As we saw in that documentary, and we apologize for the slight nag in the documentary, that Diya is an organization. It's rather a group of people, of young people who come from different walks of life. They come together on one platform and take part in activities that somewhere impact the humanity, the society, and the world at large. This is what Diya was founded for in the year 2006. As we heard our late President Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, there was a need to give a platform to the young population of India to express themselves and engage themselves in activities that concern national interests, uh, that impact the society at large, and ultimately to the entire universe taken as a whole. This platform of Gyan Sabha was conceived uh, virtually a couple of years back when COVID hit, and it was practically impossible to communicate with people physically. We conceived this platform, and it has been our constant endeavor to call on this platform people from different walks of life, from the fields of science, law, finance, medicine, and such other professions and fields, even sports. Today is a special day for us as we are joined by a very special guest to talk on something that we have been doing. I'll just give a brief background before I introduce our speaker for today and request her to guide us on this very important topic. Augade Sanskarvan Pidi. That means how should we shape those children, or how do we sensitize those parents who are about to deliver or who plan a child. So there's one journey that is during the pregnancy where we inspire them to read positive literature, think positive, take care of their health in general, mental and physical. But there is something that comes before uh, a couple decides to become parents, or someone decides to become a parent. So we are going to talk about that today, from womb to world, the journey that shapes our life. And joining us today is Miss Anna Verwaal from the Netherlands. And I would take this opportunity to introduce Anna. Uh, she's a maternal child health nurse, conscious conception and birth consultant, primal period and childbirth educator, UCLA certified lactation educator, a TEDx speaker, and birth photographer from the Netherlands. After a long career in various obstetrical and home health settings, she preferred to work with families and babies privately and started her own practice in LA. Since 2006, Anna lectures around the world about the long-term effects of the and perinatal period, the hormonal physiology of childbirth, breastfeeding, and bonding, and the psychological, emotional, and spiritual aspects of birth. She's a long-term member of APPPAH, the Association of Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Health. We at Dia Mumbai extend a very warm welcome to you, Anna, and we request that you take over and guide us on this very important uh, topic, that is Hitaito.
Can you give me the microphone? It says it's muted still. Am I on now?
You are.
Okay. Vijay, thank you very much for this introduction and for inviting me to come and speak to your audience. An audience that's very dear to me because it's an audience that holds so much potential. I prepared a presentation and I'll share the screen now to share with you what I was hoping to talk about today. Let me see. Can you see this okay and can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. We can see the presentation.
Okay, fine. Okay, then I'll just go through it slide by slide. Thank you very much, Vijay, and welcome to everybody who's watching live, and welcome to those of you who might be watching at a later time. I'm kindly requesting not to take screenshots of the images I'll be using because so many of the images are from my private practice, and I do that to protect the babies and or the parents that have given me permission to use the photographs in order to be able to teach with them, but not to share them freely on social media. So I hope that that can be appreciated. One of the most important things that I found in my own life is if you want to help awaken humanity, then we really have to start with ourselves. And my own journey has been a profound journey into awakening, and it was a journey that I didn't see coming. And as I'm showing you this slide now, if you look at it for a moment, some of you will see the animals, and some of you might see something else. And if I ask you who sees the babies and who sees the parents and who sees the relationships in this image, the reason I'm using it in my classes is to show that I'll talk about a paradigm shift. We were taught to learn to look at one thing in a certain way. And hopefully by the end of this hour I've been given to share some of the information with you, I hope that we'll be able to look at things quite differently as well. When I talk about pre and perinatal themes, or anyone talking about pre and perinatal themes, is something that can be very activating. And why is that? Because we're talking about a period in your life that is very, very early. I talk about conception moments, I talk about imprints from the time in the womb, and I talk about birth. So as we go along in this talk, you'll probably start wondering, what was my time like in the womb? How did I get there? How was my birth experience? And most of all, how was I welcomed into the world? Who was part of my welcoming committee? Who was there? And maybe who was not? So, as I said before, because we're talking about memories that are held in our cellular consciousness that can get activated when I mention them now, and it could be when you're least expected, it's very important that you are also understanding that any of the things that might come up can be healed. We can work through that. So I don't know the scenario you might have chosen for your life this time. But if it was difficult, then I think it's very important that you take very good care of yourself when you do feel yourself activated. And I'm also deeply aware of the fact that I'm not just talking to those of us who are born ourselves, but also to those of you who are already parents. And maybe your parenting experience has not been ideal, or becoming a parent, the moment of birth. So then you're also holding in your heart the journey that your baby or babies have gone through. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for a moment, and take good care of yourself through it all, and take good care of your inner child when it feels maybe hurt for the first time, or it's just realizing, wow, some things did happen to me that had a great and deep effect on me. And then I also would like to extend a bit of a warning for those of you who are pregnant currently watching, that your babies are noticing how you're feeling, and that you just say, well, mom is watching something that is activating her, but it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what she's feeling about things that might have happened to me when I was little. So I just wanted to say that as well for those of you watching at home. Now, when we look at it, what is the most important day of your life is when you're born, and then the day you find out why. And I'm talking to you from a very small country in the Netherlands, more known for tulips and windmills. And I was born here and I got educated here. And then when I was relatively young, I went to Saudi Arabia, where I started working in pediatrics. And when I was working there in a hospital, I met this little boy. His name is Sultan. And he was born through Bedouin parents that lived in the desert. He was born most likely in a tent, and he was wrapped up in blankets. And his parents had brought him to the hospital and had left him behind and walked away and never returned. So I was one of the nurses taking care of Sultan for the time he was there. And one of the times I had taken care of him and gave him a new IV, a new intravenous line, and a new little tube through his nose, he tried to reach out and wanted to hold on to my finger. And that's a moment that I will remember for as long as I live, because Sultan was born, what we estimate, around 28 weeks gestational age. But what I noticed was the awareness with which he tried to hold on to my finger. So I photographed it. And I can say now, 30 some years later, that little Sultan, who didn't even weigh more than 1.5 pounds, has become one of my greatest teachers in life. Because he left me wondering that if babies are this conscious at 28 weeks, then how conscious must they already be inside the womb? So this was the year 1990, and the Gulf War broke out, and I got evacuated, and I ended up in Los Angeles. And I started working in Los Angeles in a busy labor and delivery unit, where I learned a lot of new things. I learned that a lot of birth happens surgically. It was a very medicalized system where I gotten into, and being raised from and coming from the Netherlands, birth at home was very common in the country where I was born myself. So this was a very medicalized way of approaching birth. And all along I wondered, what happens to these babies when they go through all these experiences? How would that affect them? How do routine newborn nursery procedures affect a baby? What do they feel about all of that? I noticed that we take babies away routinely and brought them back to their moms for breastfeeding, and then they went back to the nursery again. So I wondered, what does that separation do, in our lives? How does it show up later? I also know that when I later became a member of the Association of Pre- and Perinatal Psychology and Health, I learned a lot about bonding and how incredibly crucial the beginning right after we're born is for bonding. And we should not bond with all kinds of medical gadgets if we can help that, Babies were kept in little bassinets, all in their own little beds, safely lined up all next to each other. We now know that when babies are same age group and they're kept together in the same space and they cry, that can be an activation. because the crying sounds of your own species at around the age you are yourself can be having a very negative effect on us. When I had worked in high-risk obstetrics for about 8 years, I ventured out into home health. I became a home health nurse in the city of Los Angeles, and I firsthand saw what birth experience had done to the relationship between a mother and a child, or how could they have interfered? Maybe I should say it that way. Other things would have already had been in place as well. But I firsthand saw what happens to babies when they're taken away immediately from their moms, when we put them in the newborn nursery, when we have drugged their mothers to such an extent that the babies themselves are born very drugged. As you can see in this baby's eyes, it has no idea how to latch on to its mother's breast because it's still too drugged from the effect of the drugs we gave to an adult-sized woman that are now also in a tiny baby's body. I saw babies that were pulled out by forceps. Some that were just pulled out because that's the way the doctor did the delivery, and some because they had to, because it became a life-saving maneuver that was important. But I wondered, what do these procedures do with babies? What does it do to a baby when it's intubated and it lies there crying, but nobody can hear the sounds it makes? You know, how do we respond to a baby that's crying, but we can't hear it? How does that show up later in life? And I saw perfectly healthy babies that routinely were taken away from their mothers, just because that was the way things were done in the hospital. And you're looking at this baby I photographed, was less than 4 hours old, with a look in his eyes, sorry, a very sensitive screen on my computer. But he looked at me like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? There's nothing wrong with me. And I had to say, it is true, there's nothing wrong with you. It's routine hospital procedure that we do this. So I met a lot of women in my home health career that told me their stories of how their birth had been. And then I saw how it showed up in babies. It actually made me want to go back to school and learn more about lactation, because I hadn't learned enough in my training or my specialization as a maternal-child health nurse about the long-term effects of the experience of birth. And after I worked clinically also in home health for a couple of years, I stopped doing all of that just to support women before they gave birth, because I felt that's where I could make a difference. And for about 10 years, all I did was watching women birth. How does a woman become a mother? How do fears show up? Where do fears come from? Could it be that she already had these fears inside her? And I saw many things in my career that absolutely convinced me that we must have some kind of cellular memory where our experiences are stored. And not just the women giving birth, but also their partners. I saw men, and I saw one man in particular, and those pictures I didn't want to put in, but literally when his wife was told she was ready to push, he grabbed his head like this, and he whispered, "We're going to die, we're going to die." And later, when I talked to his mother, I asked her, "What happened at your birth of your son?" And she said, "Why do you want to know? We never told him anything. Why would you ask that question?" I'm like, "I think I saw something when his wife was giving birth." And then she literally said, "When I had 10 centimeter dilation, they put the forceps on his head, but inside me, they hit a blood vessel and I nearly bled to death." So I realized in my career that we have a profound capacity to remembering how we were born. I just want to pause for a moment there, because some of you might now wonder, wow, how did the birth that I had affect our child? Or what happened at my own birth? And I remember from back in the days that I had so many answers that I found in my job, and I had no idea who to ask. Is this true? Until I went, I wanted to show this. You see, this is when I don't know where I am in my presentation, because I added some to show you the differences of babies that I saw coming into the world, where birth was not disturbed, and when babies were allowed to come in completely on their own accord and without any medication. And I myself noticed a big, big difference in their facial expressions, in their level of awareness right after birth. These babies are all less than 15 minutes old. And look at the way they really look at us, you know. So this also profoundly affected me when I started attending more home births in the city of Los Angeles, and I saw the differences in how babies come into the world. So with all of my answers, I wanted to go somewhere with my questions. And that's when I met this doctor, Dr. David Chamberlain. He was a psychologist, a birth psychologist, which I didn't know at the time. But I thought a psychologist would be a good person to ask, do you have any idea how we come into the world? Could it affect us? Do babies remember birth? And I remember that he stood up from the lunch table, and I thought, oh, Anna, that was a dumb question. I shouldn't have asked it. And then what happened was he came back and he put this book on my plate. He had just written this book. And I remember bursting into tears and talking to him. I said, do you believe that it's true, that babies can really remember everything? And he said, absolutely. And then he said, why don't you become a member of our association so you can meet Dr. Thomas Verney? He is the psychiatrist with whom I have started a foundation called APPPAH, the Association of Pre- and Perinatal Psychology and Health. And together we are convinced that womb ecology creates world ecology, and that everything that happens in the womb is what we see play out throughout the world. So I met this group of people that I felt like I've met my soul's tribe. And I went to every conference they have given ever since in order to learn everything that the research that they had come up with. Now, there's a journal of pre- and perinatal psychology and health, and there were just a few things in the beginning that allowed me to read about the studies they had done, of which I had kind of already seen many of the results in my private life and in my work. One of the things that I think is extremely important to share is that the research shows that prenatal and perinatal, and for those of you who are not familiar with the terms, prenatal is everything that happens from conception to the birth experience, and perinatal is the birth experience itself. And what they had discovered is that this period contributes to psychological and personality development, and that everything that happens to us in that time has a lasting effect. Not only that, these effects can be found in the way people live and the way they behave, and we can identify it. And when we work with birth imprints, we can identify by the imprint where it must have occurred or what must have happened in someone's life. So another person I met during these conferences is Dr. William Emerson. He is one of the most incredible birth psychologists there is. He has, I think, 60 years experience, and he's studied all the kinds of behaviors in people that are related to their birth. And he told me, and others, of course, at the conferences, that we have sperm and egg consciousness. That's where it starts. You know, it starts before that when we look at the soul journey. But for now, I want to keep it to the egg and sperm consciousness. We have in our body our conception memory, in our cellular memory. We hold that imprint. We have imprint of implantation. And what I want to say about implantation is that that happens in the second week of our lives, when the blastocyst comes out of the fallopian tube and kind of falls into the uterus and attaches into the uterine lining of the mother. The people that work with pre- and perinatal imprints, looking at that as our first relationship with our mother, is when we first make contact with the physical body of our mom. And that's where a lot of issues to do with pre- and perinatal imprints can already arise from. And then after implantation, your mom might not even know yet she's pregnant with you. But then comes the moment that she discovers, the moment that pregnancy is confirmed. And what they say, and what somebody once said during a conference, is that some of us walk around with a broken heart long before our heart beat for the very first time. And if you look at this beautiful image of Leonard Nielsen, it's an image of the heart developing in the early stages of the embryo developing. And it's actually around the heart that we grow and make this movement. So they're even looking at people with heart problems or high blood pressure. that it could be related to what was our discovery like, and other reasons, of course, too, but what was our heart? How did it feel in our heart when we were first discovered, particularly if the discovery was not a happy one? It was a mistake or a not wanted pregnancy. And then, of course, we have the whole time that we are in the womb. Those 9 months, or for some 8 months, or even 7 months if you come prematurely. But what happened during that time that you spent inside your mother's womb? And then, of course, we have the birth experience itself. Of all these important developmental stages and experiences, we hold memory in our bodies. Bruce Lipton, who was also a very welcome speaker, and I'm talking about 25 years ago, he told me something that made me fall off my chair back in the days. And that was that he talked about genomic imprinting. What happens before the genes come together in the moment of conception is that in the months leading up to the moment of conception and ovulation first, of course, the egg is being imprinted by everything that the mother goes through in her environment. So, as a matter of fact, conception, yes, it happens the moment the sperm reaches the egg, but actually is the preparation time for conception is the most important, because that already decides how that egg and what genes in the egg is going to be activated when it meets the sperm. So that was something that I remember when I heard about that. I thought this needs to go into the whole world. And your country, India, is already much further in making this part of your culture with your beautiful Garbha Samskar programs, which are still relatively unknown to us here in the West. He also said that everything a mother eats, feels, and drinks in her environment is of huge impact on her baby's future health, intelligence, and the entire genetic manifestation. And of course, in the Western world, I think we had more smoking women than in India, but also secondhand smoking. When a partner smokes, we have to keep that in consideration. And there's many babies that have spent time in what I call a toxic womb, you know, and there's different toxicities, of course, but smoke is one that has a huge impact. And if you look at the ultrasound images that I wanted to share with you, we see that babies have normal hand-to-mouth movements while they're in the womb. But we see that babies, their mothers just smoked a cigarette. We see that that is significantly different and a lot more, you know. So we call that in pre- and perinatal psychology the umbilical effect. Everything that comes to us through the umbilical cord that connects us to our mother, who is the environment we grow in. And what I do want to mention right now is that we, of course, didn't know all of this in the 60s when I was born and my mother smoked. We actually had advertisement that literally said that smoking caused low birth weight. Talk about a win-win situation, because you have an easy birth, a small baby, but you do have the full flavor of your Winston cigarette. And back in the days, we had obstetricians that smoked. So where did we get the examples from? And I just wanted to name that because we are doing things now in obstetrics that we think are innocent, but we will find out shortly or in the next couple of decades that they too have had a profound effect on the developing fetus and the baby. And we then have to, you know, come to the consideration, wow, we didn't know better. So no guilt there if you've done things that affected you, but we do need to feel responsible for the fact that we now know that when grandma was pregnant with your mother, you already spent over 4.5 months in the developing ovary of your mother as a stem cell becoming the child and the person you have become today. So in essence, we are also carried for a while in our grandmother's wombs. And that has an effect on us. We call it the epigenetic inheritance that we receive. But now back to the mother. The fetus and the development of the fetus is completely determined by the environment it lives in. So we need to look at how do we make that environment as good as possible. So what we see is that Mother Nature was so wise that she made sure that the environment the baby is growing into or developing in we have to prepare it for the environment it's going to be born into in order for it to survive. So mothers with that also give the life examples for her child, but also circumstances give life examples for a child. Just imagine what's happening in countries that are in war and women are pregnant. What kind of examples do we give these babies in the womb? Yeah, we prepare them to be able to deal with war really well. That's what happens in order for them to be able to survive better. So what we also need to become aware of is that everything that we do experience in the womb lays a template for how we relate to the world, to ourselves, our health, our own being, but also to others. And why is that? And how is that, I should say, rather? Individual cells, they say, have the capacity for memory before the brain has formed. So if you look at this image and a moment of ovulation, and then here's the sperm. I don't know if you can see my arrow move, but when the sperm comes into the egg, this whole stage we go through, we have stored in our cellular memory. And the moment the sperm enters the egg is something that's stored in us as well. And I want to show you something that is fairly recent. And it's a story that we always were told that the fastest and the best sperm is the one that wins, right? And then we met in our world Dr. Jaap van der Waal. And I want you to, I pause it for a second. I want you to look at this egg rotating. As it rotates, you see there's lots of sperm that have made it all the way. And what we now know is that it's not the fastest sperm that enters the egg. It's the egg actually that opens up to invite the sperm. And that's quite a different story than the one that most of us would have been told. And I just want to show you, if I can get back to start, the egg cell rotating and all these sperm around it. They call it a dance. It's a beautiful dance, and he calls it the pollination of the flower instead of the penetration of the egg. So if you're interested in watching more, just remember the name Jaap van der Waal and go to his website where he has a lot more information that's available. But it leaves us to think, oh, I need to go now to the next slide. Let me see. That's the one. Yeah. So what does it say about how a lot of babies these days are coming into being? How does it feel for an egg to be penetrated by a sharp needle? What do these kind of conception experiences do to children and later to adults when they grow up? There are a lot of pre- and perinatal researchers, but therapists that are working with a large group of people that has been conceived this way. And I think that we need to keep that in consideration as to how is it going to show up if it had to be. Now, I do want to say that most of these children, of course, were extremely wanted by their parents. And if you look at this image, which is deeply moving, you see the amount of injections this mother had to give herself in order to be able to have a child. So they are far better off in many ways than those who might not have been wanted at conception. So I do want to mention that. And what do we see in the patterns that were studied when we were wanted at conception? We see that it is profoundly helpful in life. That at the moment of discovery, your mother felt a yes, wow, and your father was told and he felt a yes. Then you go into life going, I'm wanted, I'm lovable, and that's the kind of life. It's very likely that you will be able to live that with a greater ability of love and life. So then when we talk about the womb, you know that there are many different other ways, of course, we could have been conceived, but for the duration of this talk, I'm just going to talk about the different experiences that we could have had all the way through birth. So what was the time like in the womb for you? What do you know? How might it have affected you? You know, we know that whatever happens to the mom is what happens to the babies, and babies don't differentiate. They don't know that's happening to the mom. They feel as if it's happening to them. We also know that babies listen to us long before we listen to them. And I always wonder, what was the intonation of the conversations your parents were having? What did you hear? And how about that now? You know, are you sensitive to that now if they fought a lot? Or have you found a partner that makes you feel exactly the same as what you already heard when you were in the womb? Stress, of course, is very detrimental, but there's a lot of research about that, so I'll leave you to look at that for yourself. Illness, of course, is very scary for a child, because if something is happening to the mom, then your own life becomes danger as well in the womb. When women, are having a lot of worries, sometimes we have worries that we can't prevent from happening. But what we can do is connect to the baby in the womb and say, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your mom is so concerned because your older brother is sick, or grandma is not doing too well, and I'm so worried about her. What I'm feeling has to do with my life right now, and it is not because of you. Even doing that, pre- and perinatal therapists have said, has a huge positive effect on the babies developing in the womb. Rather than later on feeling that they were the ones who caused the emotional status of their mother to be too worried or too sad or too depressed, etc., etc. Sadness I've already talked about a little bit, because what if we lose somebody while we're pregnant and we have loss? Loss of an older child, loss of a parent, loss of a best friend. We do have to keep in mind that the babies in the womb are going to try to help their mothers feel better, which is impossible. And the term fetal therapist originates in the womb, when we're trying to do things to help our mothers feel better, and we weren't able to really reach her. That might make you a really good therapist in life, where you're trying to help others in a way you weren't able to help your mom. Gender is a big issue too, not just in India, but also around the world, because if you're the fifth girl in a row, then your parents might have really wanted you to be a boy. But we see that in the womb, we already feel whether we were the wanted sex or not. And we see overachieving women that have careers that you go, my goodness, how incredible. And I find out more often than not that they were meant to be a boy, and that we're doing things to still try to please our parents. So another thing is Vanishing Twin. I'm not sure if much is known about this yet in India, but many out of 10 pregnancies that were started as a twin, only one ends up being born a twin. So there are 9 where along the way we lose our twin, and that could be in the first, in the second, or in the third trimester. And the surviving twin has had that experience in the womb, even though your parents might have never been aware of the fact that there had been another baby there with you. And that's, of course, pre-ultrasound, more common. But also early on, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we can already lose a twin and be profoundly affected in our life by that early loss. And then, of course, the last couple of years, what that has done to many babies in the womb is something that we're still going to find out in years to come. Fear that our mothers might have felt, isolation, is going to have an absolute detrimental effect on human development over the next few decades. I also want to talk briefly about prenatal procedures that are so commonly done, but we're doing them without the awareness that things might be very scary for a baby in the womb. So what I say when I teach midwifery students or medical students or anyone who's kind of interested in listening to this information is that we always need to explain what we're going to do as a care provider. Then we pause, and then we ask permission. Also, a baby in the womb, we say, is it okay if I touch you right now? I need to do a procedure. I am going to pause for a moment, and then I'll explain how I'm going to do this. That is hugely important. I cannot stress that enough. For so many babies, things that we do to them become less scary when we give them these moments of recognition, but also these moments of profound respect for the level of consciousness they already have while in the womb. And that is going to show up later in life, whatever our experiences were like in the womb. And then I want to briefly touch upon one of the most important subjects, and that's the father. We always kind of focus on the mom, but I just want to shout out to all you dads and future fathers to be, is that if you feel there's not much for you you can do, I want you to know that the way you love your wife is how you're going to help your baby the most. So please, please support her throughout your pregnancy, because the physical, emotional, psychological benefits that your child will receive from that are huge. Okay. And then we get to the birth experience. How were you born? How are we born? I think I put in, a few pictures, and I with all due respect for our cultural maybe differences, I hope to choose pictures that show birth, how it can be done. This is a birth I attended where the father is the one receiving his child with the skilled hands of the midwife, but also the mother. And if you look at this baby coming into the world, you can go, oh, it's a bit scared because, oh my God, what's happening? But then there's this moment of feeling supported, feeling welcomed. It is hugely important that we don't disturb that, and that the baby goes immediately to the mother after birth so that they can gaze in each other's eyes. And I will talk a bit later about why that is so important. But then many births, and the next picture is a birth that I witnessed. And I've also witnessed birth happen in India. And I have to say, it was quite shocking how we treat women in labor, how we talk to them, how we do things to their bodies without asking permission or explaining what we're doing and why. And I read once that labor pain should never come from a caregiver's hands. And unfortunately, I think in most countries in the world, it is still also because of the caregivers' lack of awareness about the effects this has on humanity, and it not being part of our trainings, that we continue to do things that we should stop doing. And this is a picture from a neonatologist from my own country. I read it in the newspaper a few years ago, where he was interviewed after a 40-year career as a neonatologist. And he's interviewed and he says, yeah, we had to do things to babies where we just had to open their mouth, intubate a baby, put a tube down, and, quickly get it over with. So also here, we have a lot of doctors that do enormously great things to keep babies alive, but there is not enough awareness yet about how we need to do these things to keep babies alive, and that babies have a capacity for feeling and remembering. Because in those days that these doctors worked, like this neonatologist, they weren't taught that babies have an ability to feel pain. We actually believe they did not until much later. And then researchers found out that not only did they have the capacity to feel pain, and prenates in the womb feel pain, but then they probably don't remember it. And now we know that we didn't just feel it, but we also remembered what happened. And that has caused a huge shift in the field of pre- and perinatal psychology, of course. But it's a shift that I hope echoes out in the medical world, where we start paying attention more to the baby's consciousness. And if you look at this, and that's what APPPAH, the association I belong to, says, is that babies in the womb are conscious human beings, and they deserve to be treated like that. A very well-known image that was once in Time magazine, I think on the cover, is this baby with the yellow dot wasn't doing too well. And a nurse, and I was working in Los Angeles at the time, and I remember this story, how it moved me, because here's a nurse that went against hospital policy and put the healthy twin sister next to the sick one that they feared was going to die. And what they saw is the healthy twin put her arm around the sick sister, and that she improved. And if you want to look up this story, when you look up Kylie and Brielle and Rescuing Hug, you see the stories and the subsequent interviews on YouTube when they grow up into teenagerhood. So it was something that moved me, because here was a nurse that felt, you guys do remember what happened. And that was how I felt back then when I was working with babies. But when we look at what happens to babies early on, when we need to keep them alive, we have to also imagine what they go through. The noises, the sounds, the lights, the procedures, the policies, everything non-stop coming at them. And of course, we needed to do that to keep babies alive, but the routine things of moving babies away from their mothers is also causing a lot of stress. And that's what is now called the stress epidemic. And when we look at that, what happens when we have removed mothers from their babies? We see that in our society all around us. We see a lot of disconnection, and this due to lack of bonding, separation, depression, eating disorders, substance abuse, all of these things that have become part of our societies that we live in. And so many of these problems have to do with what happened in the pre and perinatal period. So that leaves me to believe that there's reason to think that we can improve these statistics. We can improve what's going on by doing things differently. Some research has shown that the way we are born could be very similar to the way some people chose to live life. And we saw that babies that had been asphyxiated or people that were born asphyxiated would choose that mode of suicide through oxygen deprivation, mechanical means, or due to forceps. And if you read this is a study that should make us shiver and go, wow, then we need to help babies that have had these experiences. What can we do for them so that we can heal, help them heal from these imprints? And again, babies do not only feel, they remember everything that happened. And jokingly, I heard someone once say that at birth, a baby has more brain cells than the pediatrician that's doing the checkup. And that's something that we should keep in mind. Routinely, in most hospitals around the world, babies are still separated, laying together in little boxes. And I'm telling you, this is where things go wrong. If you want to build a healthy society and you want to build a connected, caring world, then we need to keep babies with their mothers, because that is a time for bonding. That is a time when babies feel nurtured. That is a time when the relationship between a mother and child can take place after birth. Then the relationship between that child and others in life will be enhanced, and that is so incredibly important. A researcher not long ago put herself and her 3-month-old through an MRI scan. And I would say don't do this at home. But it is incredible to see which areas of the brain light up because of a mother touching and kissing her baby's forehead. So this is a neurobiological process that Mother Nature intended for us to go through. And yes, not all babies can stay with their mothers. And then I would say, try to make sure that these babies can be with their dads, or have them go back to their moms as soon as possible. And if they can be with their dads instead, then skin to skin would even be more of an ideal option, So coming, I think, to the closure of my talk, one of the hopes that I have for this world is that pre and perinatal psychology and pre and perinatal imprints and the importance of the pre and perinatal period is going to be taught in any kind of university, school, where we are allowed to work with babies and pregnant women. This should be part of our training. This should be part of our curriculum. Because I profoundly believe that when we become more conscious of how conscious babies are, we will create a more conscious and caring and connecting world, or connected world, I should say. And then I want to leave you just reading this. It's a beautiful quote by Suzanne Arms, where she said, if we hope to create a non-violent world where respect and kindness replace fear and hatred, we must begin with how we treat each other at the beginning of life. For that is where the deepest patterns are set, and from these roots grow fear and alienation, or love and trust. So it is all with how we come into the world. We're saying that it is, in hindsight, so much easier and better to build a healthy child than to have to repair a broken adult. And I believe that we can create this world, which is one of the reasons why, when I got the invitation to speak to your audience, Divine Indian Youth Association, I thought there are some of you who are still going to be parents. There are some of you who can still make a profound difference. Some of you might become doctors, and your hands might, after hearing this, become maybe more caring or more gentle, or you'll have more pause in your work when you need to do things to babies or pregnant women. The way we touch pregnant women, we touch their children, we touch the next generation. The way we will care about our earth, about the health of our planet, our Mother Earth, is also going to be cared for better when we ourselves have been cared for better when we enter this world. So despite the fact that it was a very short notice to prepare for this talk, I felt a yes when I was asked to do it, because even if it would make a difference for one person, it has been very much worth it. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and while thanking you, you're looking at a little baby called Otis, who I photographed when he was placed on his mother's chest. And he is, when I took this photo, not more than 10 minutes old. And I think that should just convince us, if nothing else did, that babies are conscious human beings and that they deserve to be treated as such. For my resources, I used a lot of the information from APPPAH, the association. I do encourage you, if you're interested in becoming a member, they have a lot of free programs you can watch online, which will reveal a wealth of information and speakers from around the world. So if you want to do that, then go to birdpsychology.com. And I hope that maybe our paths cross again. I was planning on coming to India when the whole COVID situation started. So I was actually in India when I had to go back to Holland. And I do hope one day to come back to India, which I do feel is the country of my soul. So thank you. I'll get out of the presentation, I think now, Vijay?
Yes, you can stop the screen share.
Okay, I can get out, right?
Yeah. So thanks. I'm actually speechless on what we just witnessed. Perhaps we don't look at things from the perspective that we have today, and it is certainly going to make a great impact on everyone who has attended this presentation. And when you say if it'll make a limited impact, let me tell you, it's going to make a great impact on, because we have a lot of young people joining us today who've heard this talk, and I'm sure some of the things were an eye opener, that and we wouldn't have thought from that perspective. It gives a completely new perspective to approach pregnancy, not just pregnancy, when we decide to become parents, that entire period of pregnancy, and the way you put it, how we were born. So uh, it it was completely, I'm speechless, and then also emotional to an extent, and what we just witnessed. uh, I have got a few questions. So what I have done is I've taken them together into one, so that addresses everybody's concern, and I've commonly picked the common theme, that is. So people have asked, if you were to put down three things that people should do differently, either they're planning to become parents or those who are pregnant at the moment, three things that they should do differently. Uh, of course, they've seen your presentation, but what would you advise these young uh, people who intend to become parents are or are on the verge of becoming parents?
Uh, First of all, thank you for your feedback. Thank you very much, Vijay, for your own personal reaction to the content. And thank you for asking me this profound question. What we can do is never too late to start today. And what I mean to say by that, it's never too late to explore how you might have become who you are today because of circumstances. What I find in the work I do is that it is so liberating when you realize that you are wearing a lot of layers that never belong to you. When you start understanding the layers, it's like you're emptying a backpack. You're emptying a backpack that was put on your shoulders with all the imprints from your parents and their parents before them. And I mean, there's so much to say about this topic that I want to try to answer it in a way that you can really take and do something about it at home now. If possible, talk to your parents about what was going on around the time of your conception or your time in the womb and your birth, so that you understand where certain behaviors or fears or imprints might have originated, so that you can help change that yourself. Second is that try to give your child an empty backpack. I say give your child wings and roots, but not a lot of luggage. So that's why this Garba Samskar, I related to that so much when I first came to India and learned about it, because it helps you prepare for these 9 months of the baby in the womb and how you can give your child the best possible start. But also our thoughts, our beliefs, our fears are of effect on our baby. So always kind of put your hand on your belly and say, wow, today was not a good day when Mama was pregnant. I was too stressed out. Or at work, I was so angry at your father. What you do is you sit down, you sit against a tree, you look at a cloud going by, and you just connect to the baby in the womb, and you explain what you're feeling. And then you're saying, this has nothing to do with you. I'm sorry that you had to go through this. And such is life. We also have to prepare children for life, and it's not always going to be perfect. So I think look into your past so that you can come more free in the future. Prepare for a child if you're not pregnant yet by talking to your partner. I remember once sitting in a rickshaw in India where a light bulb moment went on in my head, and it went, oh my God, we could have a preconception, prenatal preparation program to help people to connect with each other as they are getting to know each other before marriage, as they're getting to know each other in the early marriage, and say, how were you conceived? How were you gestated? How were you born? How does it play out in our lives? How is it that we don't want to repeat that what happened to us for our children? You need to become more conscious about how it affected your own life first. And I find that the more work we do with regards to how we became who we are because of circumstances, the more you feel inclined to wanting to have a positive effect on the generations yet to come. I hope that that's an answer that you can do something with.
Yes, uh, you said that that was my personal feedback, but the audience, it's one of the listeners has commented it was simply mesmerizing. So that's the feedback that we are generally. Um, I'm glad that it's a topic that would sensitize people going ahead, and it will make a difference somewhere. The way people approach pregnancy and this entire issue as a whole. And with
Yeah.
that, we come to a close of today's session. And I wouldn't leave this opportunity to welcome you to um, India at any time that's convenient for you, whenever you can make time, and especially to Dia's headquarters, which is a university called Dev Sanskriti University. Uh, what the university is doing is it is confluencing some of the ancient Indian studies into a modern context and is presenting to the world. For example, yoga. How do we popularize yoga amongst youngsters, and how effective it can be in a modern context? So that's what the university is doing. And if you could give a talk there to those young students studying there, it would be great. So I'll be in touch with you, and whenever you are in India, please do let us know, and we would it would be great to have you at Dev Sanskriti University.
I'd be very happy. Um, I'd be very happy to come back to India. And actually, I was asked to start a center there, for conscious conception, conscious pregnancy, and conscious birthing, and a birth center as well. Because there's lots of beautiful programs in India about Garbhasamskar and how to get the baby in consciously. But now we need to look at how do we get the babies out? How do we get them out consciously? And how can we change? And then with regard to all women listening and Women's Day being around the corner, I would just like to say this. The divine has chosen the female body to be the one to bring forth birth and to give birth to the new generation on this planet. And I think it is high time that we start treating women like that. They're divine beings that hold the future of humanity in their wombs, and we all should feel responsible for treating them like that. Happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day, and that was actually the theme that we had. And I mean, we'd call you for this, and it's a great message that you've given towards the end of the talk. And it's my duty to introduce the speaker for the next session. It's going to be Dr. Sudhir Shah, a noted neurologist, and he'll be speaking on the topic pursuit of happiness. Do join us on the next session of Gyan Sabha. Thank you very much.